Should I copy it here?
Yes, yes,
It's better to do it.
yes. We are, because we are doing it online, YouTube streaming everything.
Okay, so that will-
Again, we need to set up a lot of stuff in our lab.
if I have a comment in- Video was from the-
ये रहा।
वीडियो फिर आई नहीं हेलो
बड़ा है नहीं, मास्टर नहीं बड़ा है। या फिर 1:1, 1:2 कहाँ से कर हाथ में ले लीजिए 1:1, 1:2 मास्टर बढ़ाने के लिए बोलिए।
हेलो हेलो हेलो
Is it done, sir, or not?
हेलो 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 आइए
Lightly to indicate. You can send via mail. That's all. Otherwise, you can open your mail actually directly.
It's not sensing.
Can we open your mail, sir? हाँ जी सर बोलिए।
म्हणजे पहा बंद करतो माइक चेक करना बंद करते हैं
electronic things while getting boards are things from Chor Bazaar. And he's saying that we used to get them, it was cheaper. And these are all the oral history interactions of Shrikant had initially. And then with that, they started the whole thing. Everything there, truck full of instruments.
10 to 15
Yes.
Very down and then they started and then and then the process becomes and then
so you can add your own money. He was in representing position of now he is
CMD is chairman managing director. He's resigned. He's also retired. Of creative museum designers in space.
Oh, yeah. So they are the ones
He
who are
is
making.
he was supposed to be. He also is retired now. I retired last year. He came here, so it was sorry.
So then he got his Inauguration and Hava, they were the left account. She continued. So then he moved, of course, away, and then Professor Menon joined. After Professor Menon joined, they again started the find out about the new changes. And then he is Narasimhan, of course, the Professor Menon student. He and his team, and in that time, the Japanese collaboration started with Mr. Miyake of Osaka University. And then we are talking about how collaborate with the Japanese. Meanwhile, other people also wanted to contribute, but at that time, Professor Menon made it very clear that collaboration has to happen. It has to be a collaboration. Then because we are already started doing the experiment, so it will not be like only their input and their leadership. It is a joint thing. So this is the letter which I have written here. Where he is talking very clearly about that we are already in it. So if you want to join, you are most welcome. But the thing is, it has to be. So and then the two most important person here, of course, Ramana there, S. Narayan and Ramana, they were there with us. He was a senior most person. They were students. So they all of them put together were in the first one. And then here,
आपका हाथ में एक माइक रहेगा जस्ट okay.
He is a very young person. He joined the collaboration, and then later when he came to give a public lecture here in 1998, you can see from the auditorium, it's very close to TIFR. He was an honorary fellow of TIFR. A very long relationship that started with the Japanese team with Miyake, the Durham team with Anand and of course Professor Menon, and then V.S. Narasimhan and the other people. They started the whole thing. In the meantime, there was the Frederick Reiners, who was a Nobel laureate. He contacted Hama, and he also wanted to join. But at that time, like Professor Menon has said, together, but you have to be on the basis of a total mutual one-to-one collaboration in which we are equal partners. Because we are as dominant as you. So it was like very clear. He got a bit upset and he went got the result. But the thing is that the people paper is on 12th July, and the South African team it was a 30th August. The same with a battle, 15 days difference. They got the result. Now we come. Now the time when Dr. Hama passed away. So there was a big change in leadership, change in many things. So here, Professor Menon, very young director. This is the first death anniversary of Dr. Hama. This is the Utthamnan ceremony, and there is a letter written by Mr. Shrikant and Professor Menon after Hama's death. It's a very emotional, personal letter, handwritten letter.
You give me a copy of this.
Yes.
Just one page. Yeah.
Yes, sir. I will.
No, we have half an hour for this.
Do we have time?
Yeah. Please take it.
Yes, sir, please.
Yeah, but we'll give a copy.
Yeah,
also.
yes, sir. I will give you a copy. So at that time,
Please, can you get me a copy of
yes, that I will give.
that is also.
I will give you that. I'll give you. Because it is a handwritten letter.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
yeah, because it is a bit faint and it is a little difficult to read from here. So I thought that might as well put something here. So at that time, of course, the theory that was proposed by Dr. Sala was a friend of Professor Menon. He had come to TIFR. We have Dr. Shrikanthan. So he, of course, proposed the theory of grand unification theory, and for that he also wanted to carry on with the experiment of the proton decay. So this is the Hyderabad inauguration photograph. Together we had the stone laying ceremony in Hyderabad. The IFR center in 2010. No, sir. The new campus. 2010. Absolutely, yeah. After that, Professor Menon passed away in 2016. Professor Shrikanthan passed away in 2019. So both together, this is a very nice photograph I thought. And since we have seen their young photographs, so this long association, then now the proton decay experiment. Professor Miyake, of course, was there. This is the inauguration of the second phase of the proton decay experiment. So Professor V.S. Narasimhan and Nabu Mandal. Nabu Mandal has mainly shared many photographs of this experiment here because he himself was there down in the polar thing. And many of the scientists had come. Actually, I've heard that Dr. Salam has also come, but I couldn't manage to get a photograph of Dr. Salam in the polar thing. But I managed to get this photograph. And of course, the experiment continued for a very long time. Phases. And this is a letter written by Professor Shrikanthan as director. He was at that time the chairperson asking for grants to continue with the experiment. This story has not changed. It will continue. So this is the thing. And now the main problem why it could not continue at all was that the mines closed down. And because the mines, people thought that it is not to continue this only. TIFR could not sustain the whole expenditure of taking out water, cold air, maintaining the leak, electrical things, and then do the experiment. It was just not possible. Here, Professor Menon tells what are the reasons, what makes them basically give up the experiment. And he is saying clearly that we gave us clear notice and we kept pushing them 92. Pushing them, and I used all my influence in Delhi to keep the experiments running, because by that time I have moved out of TIFR. Shrikanthan was the director. Keep the experiments running for as long as possible. But finally, we accepted a cut-off date. And here are the groups of the people who were involved. Then here, this is Professor Miyake's photograph. These are all the people, and mostly I have consulted Professor Menon's and Professor Shrikanthan's oral history. And there is an article by Professor Mandal and Shiru on resonance on paying tribute to Professor Menon. So those and some of these cameras.
Yes. You know how many things
2009.
After that, he came to us. They're all anecdotal. At that time,
20% काम से मालूम है, फेस से मालूम है।
when he said I can keep the company viable, by
बस जाते नहीं तो अभी तो ऐसा आगे कर रही हूँ, नहीं तो वो भी किसी को मेरे TIFR में वो
viable and expert.
आपका अलग है।
Some people were there, so but we were up to 600%. But you we didn't play. Yeah, because you should play. I don't think I'm going to be. I know, like how
been there to check for this INO project, but it's started.
No, that's because
Because here also he is saying that somewhere he is saying that to take out the water also. The big expenditure to drain out the water from there, then the put the air there, everything. There are attached, of course I do not. But there are letters where they are talking to the manager of Comparative mines, where they are talking about what are the expenses and how far it can be stretched and all that. There are related to that. And then initially there are the letters where they are saying that Ramanamurthy will go. But the most important is that they were always very supportive. They write throughout the mine people, throughout, right from the beginning. They were very supportive. Initially, one miner used to go down in the lift with them. Everybody said. So Sikandar,
this is what comes.
later,
They all felt very bad.
It's a long history from 51, 92, 10 PhDs have come out of it. The whole list of papers that have actually happened, but I cannot. Somebody writes only on Kodak history and consult the archives and get a lot of material.
I think particularly that aspect that patients have been continued for 2 more years. Yeah, predates finance.
And that was the definitely there was 9 years. 15 years.
Yeah, no, it was 1.5 months. July, it was the middle of July and end of August.
So that is what Satya says that they have observed.
Okay.
But he was saying that they don't give credit. That is the potential. But the attitude is very fixed that their influence and of their own
But the history writing on this should become the logical. This is
I'll give you that. Of course, how to take one person will come here. One person from Dada came first year. So these were like complete small one person for me, but the team from there. From
That should come right at that point.
Some proposal. Bargo was. I was a bit surprised at some. Got delayed because of project. Reminds us of this.
As well as Habal. That is why I have taken both of them. So that
She's the one who is actually she's created it and been the missions, but such what a question.
not available.
Not recently.
Please order few.
I don't you also try. Yes.
There is one more thing.
Not the one of those. Abba had, I think, Germany and the London Science Museum. And he come here with you. But politics. He was a part of that one. The whom they were all, including Linus Pauling. The senior and the junior, both of them.
मुझे बस पूछो शायद अभी यहाँ का हो गया तो शायद इसको
Yes, no, sir. Yes.
I thought you were a science museum.
There are letters, but I have never actually read all of them. So now that study is
Yeah,
I will
I'm 100% sure about it. I have got the reference from Extruder, but cross reference we need to have. Here is the technique.
एक मिनट
I'll see if Akshay responds, otherwise I'll ping him at like.
Yeah, might be nicer to play without the sun beating down on your head. It's very nice. I have a view of the whole auditorium and it's how it's filling and everything.
So underutilized. You know, Ashoka's building a 2,000 seater in the new campus. Where is the new campus? Right there. All the buildings you be connected. Yeah.
It's going to be one campus.
Yeah, yeah.
We'll take down this wall.
We'll just enclose it, huh?
Well, actually, the fact that it's an enclosed campus, same good. Oh God, they regulate your activity. I need this 10 minutes to sit down after that. You can get a siesta also. So put this somewhere where it doesn't touch the floor. Yes.
Hang it on the back of my chair, no?
Where is the screening for the match? One of the RHs. We see if we can get it. Just remind me. Don't leave here until all these things on our check sheet covered. When is the match starting? India versus South Africa.
Is Mursal necessary?
I think we're not leaving them for anything. Oh, that
Hello, mic check.
For this program. Before we begin today's program, I will request everybody present here to put their phones in silent mode so that we can smoothly conduct today's program. Thank you very much. Respected Chief Guest, Director, Deans, Registrar, and everyone gathered here. As you all know, Founders Day is celebrated every year on October 30th in fond memory of our founding director, Dr. Homi Bhabha's birthday. Today is Dr. Bhabha's 113th birthday. May I now request our chief guest, Dr. Kakodkar, the Director TIFR, Professor Chengalur, and our Registrar, Colonel Gokhale, to come onto the stage and kindly take their seats. Thank you very much. May I request the Director, Professor Chengalur, to welcome our chief guest, Dr. Kakodkar, with a bouquet. May I now request our chief guest and the director to garland the portrait of Dr. Baba. Thank you, Dr. Kakotkar and Professor Chengalur. I would now like to request Professor Akadev Chattopadhyay, convener of Founders Day Committee, to say a few words.
The director, Professor Chengaluru, Honorable Chief Guest, Dr. Kakotkar, Registrar Colonel Gokhale, Deans, Center Directors, and my dear friends. A very warm and hearty welcome to the 53rd Founders Day celebrations, one that's happening in person once again after a period of long 3 years. One beneficial invention that happened during the pandemic is that in addition to the conventional in-person participation, we can now have remote participation via Zoom and YouTube, links of members of all the TIFR centers spread across the country, in addition to that of the TIFR alumni spread across the globe. I extend my welcome and thanks to all such participants. As you all know, Founders Day is observed every year on the 30th of October to mark the birthday of our founder, Dr. Homi Bhabha. And as Supriya said, today is his 113th birthday. Dr. Bhabha was indeed a remarkable man, a world-renowned scientist. He didn't confine himself to the ivory tower of academia. He was an institute builder par excellence, as witnessed by the many institutes like TIFR, BARC, ECIL, etc., that owe their existence to him in large measure. He was also a man of fine taste in the arts, partly exemplified by the many beautiful pieces of painting and sculpture that adorn the walls and corridors at TIFR. Indeed, Dr. Bhabha's lifelong passion is another reminder of the successful symbiosis of the sciences and the arts, enriching, stimulating, and complementing each other. I hope that some of that spirit gets reflected in our multifaceted program today. It's also a great privilege to have among us today our eminent chief guest, Dr. Anil Kakotkar, who needs no introduction. We sincerely thank him for agreeing to come to TIFR. As part of our program today, we have an exhibition just inaugurated by Dr. Kakotkar outside on the foyer on the Kolar experiments that has been painstakingly curated by the TIFR Art and Archives section. We also have in the foyer, just outside this auditorium, an exhibition of photographs and Rangoli designs showcasing the talent of our students, staff, and other members. We have a public lecture on a topic of great importance today to be delivered by a renowned colleague of ours, Professor Mahesh Shankaran. Every year on this day, we also take the opportunity of recognizing the achievements of our students and staff. In keeping with that tradition, we will congratulate our graduating students, we will recognize gratefully the long and dedicated service of our staff members, rejoice in the achievements of sportsmen and women, and finally savor the cultural program staged by the talented members of the wider TIFR community. Well, without further ado, I once again welcome you and thank you for participating and taking interest in the Founders Day program to make it a success. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Chattopadhyay. I now request Professor Chengaluru, Director TIFR, to say a few words on today's event.
Thank you. So I'd like to add my welcome to that of Arkadev, and I welcome you all to the celebration of Founders Day. As we've heard, today marks the 113th birth anniversary of our founder, Dr. Homi Bhabha. And the Founders Day Committee, as we just heard, has also put together a very interesting program. And along with the rest of you, I'm really looking forward to hear Professor Mahesh Sankaran's talk, as well as the cultural program. The archives has also put together a fascinating trip down memory lane, an exhibition of the Kolar Goldfield experiment. As you know, this exhibition was just inaugurated by our chief guest, Dr. Kakodkar, and we are honored by his presence today. And I'd like to thank him again on behalf of the TIFR family for taking time out and being with us here today. I would encourage those of you who have not yet had a chance to look at the exhibition to please do so. It really is a really fascinating trip down the past of TIFR. Please also do take a look at the amazing photography and Rangoli exhibition that we have. And as we heard today, we also recognize those who put in long years of service at TIFR, as well as those who are graduating students. I congratulate them all. So that's all I had to say. Welcome again, and please do enjoy the program.
Thank you, sir. May I now request our chief guest, Dr. Kakodkar, to grace the occasion with his kind and inspiring words.
Good afternoon. Director TIFR, Professor Chengaluru, Registrar, Colonel Gokhale, members of TIFR faculty, TIFR staff, members of their families, and more particularly the young children, many of them who are here in the auditorium. Ladies and gentlemen. Well, first of all, let me thank Director Professor Chengaluru for this opportunity for me to be here. It enables me to pay my respects to Dr. Homi Bhabha on the Founders Day. Dr. Bhabha has been the founder of TIFR, founder of BARC, founder of Department of Atomic Energy, and many other things. So I don't think it will be easy to get another Bhabha, at least in our lifetime. The complete man that he was, a great blend of arts and science, is something that is becoming increasingly important in the modern times. And so I think it's very important that the quote-unquote Bhabha spirit is retained, nurtured, and made all pervasive for humanity to be at a level better than what it is today. For me, I don't have to say this to this audience, but there are many things, and one, as far as atomic energy is concerned, is his three-stage vision, three-stage program. Now, I have not seen any vision or mission remaining relevant and alive for such a long time. So many decades after its death, this vision, as far as atomic energy is concerned, remains as valid, as important. And coming from Dr. Bhabha, who visualized this in the very early stages of atomic energy program, I think almost the infancy of the program. And after that, several details have been worked out, several developments have taken place, several new avenues have opened up, but that vision still remains valid. So there is something fundamental about this as far as India and India's energy future is concerned. Here at TIFR, of course, TIFR has been the cradle from where everything in atomic energy emerged. And it was nice to see this, an exhibition segment on Kolar experiments put up here. And going around that, did sort of bring back alive several conversations, which, of course, I wasn't, I have nothing to do with Kolar experiment per se, but subsequently several conversations about what happened, how things happened, and more particularly towards the end when the decisions were being taken to close down the experiment. They all came alive. So I think it's an excellent way of commemorating Founders Day. On one side, you remember history. On one side, you have this very interesting lecture, which I myself am looking forward to listening to, talking about the contemporary challenges. And then in between, you have this program of recognition of achievements of our people, both in academics, sports, and other activities. So my compliments to all colleagues from TIFR on the Founders Day. And I do look forward to TIFR scaling heights year after year in this same spirit in which Dr. Bhabha created this institution. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. I now invite our Registrar, Colonel Sanjay Gokhale, to address the audience.
The chief guest for today's function, Dr. Anil Kakodkar, Director TIFR, Dr. Professor Jairam Chenglur, Dean Administration, Professor Shrirup Rai Chaudhary, the convener for today's Founders Day, Professor Arkadev Chattopadhyay, the guest speaker, Professor Mahesh from NCBS, all past and present members of TIFR families and friends. At the outset, let me wish you all a happy Founders Day and also thank our founder, late Dr. Homi Jahangir Bhabha, for giving us an opportunity to be part of this wonderful institute. We often hear that no man is greater than the organization he or she represents. However, in our case, this cannot apply to our founder, Dr. Bhabha. He definitely towers above all the institutions he founded. It is only due to his foresight, his persona, his dedication, his perseverance, his administrative acumen, and above all, his academic excellence that gave birth to our own TIFR, where we all stand today. A lot of parameters connected to Dr. Bhabha came into play to forge such an institute. His reputation as an accomplished scientist, his family connections, wealth, devotion, and some of the factors that helped him to garner resources to build such a wonderful institution. One positive part of the World War, being an army man myself, if I may be permitted to say, is that it was probably that World War which forced Dr. Bhabha to stay back in India. And at that particular time is when India badly needed someone to lead and develop the scientific temper of the country. It is only befitting that we dedicate this day to our founder on his 113th birthday. And the best way to do so is that we take a pledge or two from his life. The most important quality, the most important quality which he had was the eye for quality, which he always thought of. Though, of course, he had a book full of other qualities. Let's take a pledge today that we will ensure best quality in everything we do. While our scientists bring out the best in research, let's support them as administrators and in our administrative services. We are fortunate that due to the foresight of our founder, we have a wonderful workplace, envy of many in the country. The least we can do is give back, is to put in our best and support this institution to retain its glory, which was envisaged by our founder. On this occasion, I would like to congratulate all the students who graduated from TIFR last year, along with all those who have completed 25 glorious years of service in this great institution. I would also like to thank all the retired members of TIFR, especially those who have taken the trouble to come here today, who helped shape our institute to what it stands today. With this, I would like to conclude and once again wish you all a happy Founders Day. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next, I would request the staff to set up the stage for the public lecture. Thank you very much. I now request Professor Chattopadhyay to come on to the stage and introduce today's distinguished speaker.
Climate change is widely believed to be one of the, if not the greatest crisis facing humanity. It is generally agreed by experts that it will require collaboration across the entire spectrum of conventional disciplines to comprehend this complex phenomena. Perhaps with that in mind, Professor Mahesh Sankaran started his academic career with an MSc of all subjects in computer science from BITS Pilani. He obtained his PhD from Syracuse University, United States in 2001. Later, he did postdoctoral work at the Center for Population Biology at Imperial College in London and at the National Renewable Energy Lab at Colorado State University, USA. After this, he served as a faculty member at the University of Leeds from 2006 before joining the National Center of Biological Sciences, NCBS, Bangalore in 2013, where he is currently the Professor of Ecology and Evolution. Mahesh has won several awards, including the Ramalinga Swamy Fellowship of the Department of Biotechnology, India in 2009, and the prestigious Infosys Prize in the Life Sciences for 2021 from the Infosys Science Foundation. He is a fellow of both the Indian Academy of Sciences and the Indian National Science Academy. Professor Sankaran is widely recognized as one of the leading experts in the ecosystem of tropical savannas, especially in Africa and the Western Ghats in India. To quote from the Infosys webpage, Professor Sankaran is at the leading edge of a new wave of Indian ecologists and ecosystem scientists who are reshaping the way both India and the world view ecosystems and their relationship to climate change. It's my great pleasure to welcome him on behalf of the Apex Committee. I would now like to invite him to deliver his lecture.
Nick, can you hear me? Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you for those very kind words of introduction, and thank you so much for actually inviting me to give a talk here today. It's indeed a pleasure and an honor to be here. And what I thought I'd do today is talk about some of the work that we've been doing over the last few years. Actually, it's the last several years, almost getting 15 to 18 years that we've been working on these issues, on the ecology, evolution, and conservation of mixed tree grass ecosystems. And what I thought I'd do is start off by talking about one fairly widespread mixed tree grass ecosystems, which are the savannas, and talk about why is it that we study savanna ecosystems, what are the kinds of questions we actually address, and talk about some of the insights that we've gained over the last several years on the dynamics of these ecosystems globally. And then if time permits, I'd like to, in the latter part of my talk, also talk about another kind of mixed tree grass ecosystem, which are the forest-grassland mosaics. But let me start off by talking about savannas first. But before I go into much detail, I would actually like to sort of acknowledge the contributions of many organizations, institutes, and people that have been such an integral part of all of our work that we've done so far. Obviously, NCBS, TIFR, and DAE for all the support they've provided us over the years. I've had the pleasure of working with some amazing colleagues, Dr. Jayashree Ratnam, Niall Hannon, William Bond, Caroline Lehman, David Augustine, and there are many, many, many more savanna ecologists working across the globe that I'd really like to thank. my students, Atul Joshi, Yadugiri, Hari, Chenga, and all other members in the lab who've contributed to the work that we're doing, all our field staff, the Tamil Nadu Forest Department, the Kruger National Park from South Africa, and the Impala Research Center in Kenya for allowing us to work in these systems, the collaborators in Feral, ATRI, and of course, funding from DAE, DBT, MOES, DST, and the National Geographic Society, right? So I would really like to acknowledge their contributions right at the start. So let me start off by talking about why we study savanna ecosystems, right? We study savanna ecosystems for several reasons. One, they're ecologically unique and they're economically important biomes. They cover about 20% of the Earth's land surface. They're the second most widespread biome in the tropics. And if you look at some of the southern continents like Africa, it covers about half of the area or even more of some of the southern continents. They support a large fraction of the world's human population and a majority of its rangeland and livestock. And for us, what's interesting is they're also home to the greatest density, diversity of mammalian herbivores and carnivores of any ecosystem on Earth. Chances are you've looked at the Discovery Channel and National Geographic, and if you've seen, these programs where you have really high densities of ungulates or herbivores or carnivores, chances are it's from a savanna ecosystem somewhere in the world, right? Not only that, savannas are also very important in terms of ecosystem energy, water, and nutrient cycles, right? Particularly if we talk about the carbon cycle, and this is a graph showing net primary production. So it's the amount of atmospheric CO2 that plants actually take up and fix into their tissues on an annual basis, right? So this is a map that shows you how much is the net primary productivity across the globe. And if you look at savanna ecosystems, they account for a third of global net primary productivity, which is just a little less than tropical rainforest. All of the time, everybody's talking about tropical rainforests, but people don't think about the role that savanna ecosystems play in the global carbon cycle. So on average, 1 hectare of savanna takes up about 7.2 tons of hectare of CO2 from the atmosphere every year and fixes it in its tissue, right? If you compare this to tropical forests are higher. That's about 12.5 tons per hectare per year, right? So there's a fair amount of CO2 that the savanna ecosystems are actually pulling down every year from the atmosphere. But if you look at how much is actually stored on the ground, right? Savannas store about 120 tons of carbon per hectare per year, and it only represents about 15% of the global total, right? In contrast, tropical forests store about 320 tons of carbon per year. So what's happening here? So we know that on an annual basis, savannas are taking in about 7 tons, which is just 5 tons less than tropical forests. But if you look at how much it's stored, it's 200 tons less is actually being stored in these systems. So what's actually happening to the carbon that's being fixed every year? Well, this is because savanna ecosystems burn. So this is a map showing the map of annual fires, active fires over the period of a year. And actually, most of these fires, the majority of these fires are taking place in savanna ecosystems, right? They're the most fire-prone ecosystem in the world, and they account for about 85% of the global land area that's burnt. But this is not something new. This is not something that's happening now because of human activities or something like that. These systems have been burning for hundreds of thousands of years, and we know this from paleo records and fossil charcoal and all of this, right? So about half of the global carbon emissions from burning come from savanna ecosystems. So if you think about it, savannas are important from a biodiversity perspective. They're important from human well-being because they sustain human livelihoods, and they're also very important for ecosystem carbon and nutrient cycles, right? But besides that, they're also great model systems for the kinds of questions we're interested in. They can actually be conceptualized into very few components. You have trees, you have grasses, you have grazers. These are the ones that eat the grasses. And then you have the browsers, the ones that eat the trees. And the interactions between which are mediated by climate, biogeochemistry, that's soils, fire, and humans, right? And yet, despite this apparent simplicity, there's enough and more going on in terms of interactions and feedbacks, right, that we still don't fully understand. And most of our work over the last several years have been trying to understand the nature of these different interactions and feedbacks, and which is what I'm going to be talking about today, right? So first, what is a savanna? This is very interesting because many people are not really sure what a savanna ecosystem is. So if you think about, so if you look at, well, the term savanna was first recorded in print somewhere in the early 1600s by Oviedo y Valdez. It was recorded in Spanish, and it is believed to derive from a Carib Amerindian word meaning treeless plain or grassland, right? But this word has been variously used and widely defined since then. And in its current avatar, it typically refers to a system where you have more or less a continuous layer of grasses in the understory and a discontinuous strata of trees. So it's a system that has both trees and grasses. And this is very interesting because, you know, the grasses are physiologically fundamentally different from the trees, right? They respond differently to the same environmental controls. So they're very curious and enigmatic systems. Why isn't this a forest or a grassland? Why is it the system that's somewhere in between a forest and a grassland, right? So, but within these broad limits, if you look at savannas, you'll see that the tree cover varies widely. You can have some really open systems all the way becoming more and more wooded, right? So the question becomes, what is it that determines how many the tree cover in a savanna, and why does it vary so much? And if you actually think about it, it boils down to a coexistence question. How do trees and grasses coexist without one displacing the other? And what are the environmental conditions under which these two can coexist, right? But before I come to that, why is it important, you know, for us to understand the ratio of trees to grasses in savannas? There are many reasons why understanding this is important. Because the ratio of trees to grasses determines the way the ecosystem functions, right? Because it determines ecosystem carbon potential. So every year the grasses grow, and then at the end of the year they die, or they're burnt, they decompose, or they're eaten by herbivores. So the amount of carbon that the grasses fix actually does not, above ground, does not travel from year to year. Instead, what happens most in terms of the grasses is what they're doing below ground when it comes to carbon. Whereas trees store a lot of carbon above ground. You can actually see it. You can see a tree, you can see the wood, you can see the carbon being stored, right? So the ratio of trees to grasses becomes very important for ecosystem carbon cycles. It's very important for ecosystem hydrological cycles. So how much water is being transpired, how much is going into deep flow, how much is running off in streams and surface flow and all that. And this in turn implies it has implications for regional and biogeochemical climate and biogeochemical cycles. Next is increases in woody cover can be a problem. So this is a situation that people are seeing in many parts of the world. It's called woody encroachment or bush encroachment. So this is from the Eastern Cape in Southern Africa. It's a fixed point photographs of 1925, 1933 to 2011. As you can see over the years, there have been more and more trees coming into the system, and it's becoming more and more woody, right? And we really don't know what is driving this. There are many theories. Elevated carbon dioxide is one prominent theory as to explain this. I'm not going to go into that much, but we know that when trees increase, it has a huge impact on the grazing potential of the lands. Because when there are more trees, there's less grasses, and so you can't have livestock, you can't have wild herbivores. It affects the grazing potential of the land, right? Alternately, loss of tree cover is also a problem, like this case of degradation. This is from East Africa somewhere. Typically, these start off when you lose grasses. When you lose the grass cover, then the soils tend to run off. But trees and shrubs can act as traps to trap some of this water and the nutrients. So when you lose the trees, it further exacerbates the problem and leads to greater and greater degradation. So all in all, we know that, you know, understanding the ratio of trees to grasses in savannas is particularly important, right? So, and this is a problem that people have been thinking about a lot. You know, how is it that these two contrasting life forms are able to coexist without one displacing the other, right? And this, many of you may have seen it, but figures like this. This is from Whitaker, and it tells you what kind of biomes you can expect for any given climate, right? So people typically think that climate is what determines biomes. So if you have, wet areas that are warm, this axis is somewhat inverted, then you should see rainforests. If you have dry areas that are cold, you should see tundra, so on and so forth. But you'll see this bit in between with this climate space where it can be woodland or grassland or savanna, right? So people have not been very sure within that space what determines whether you get a woodland, what determines whether you get a grassland, or what determines whether you get a savanna. So you can have all of these three different biomes. So one with grasses and trees, and one with trees with no grasses, right? But where this transition occurs has been unclear. And this has been called the zone of ecosystem uncertain, because we're not really sure under what climatic conditions you get grasslands, you get savannas, and you get forests, right? And people have been studying this for a long time. Even in 1960, Jenny Cole said, perhaps of all types of vegetation, the savanna is the most difficult to define, the least understood, and the one whose distribution and origin is subject to the most controversy, right? And this was been termed the savanna question or the tree grass conundrum, and so on and so forth. And it's not like there were no models proposed to explain tree grass coexistence. There are lots of models. I'm just throwing one out here. You don't have to worry about the details. We can pull out many other kinds of models from the literature. They all differ in minute details, but they typically converge on what they think are the primary determinants. So you have competition-based models, which give primacy to climate and soil. So it's saying resources, that's water and nutrients, is the most important thing that determines savannas, right? So these are bottom-up models. And you have other models that say, no, it's not that. It's fire and herbivory. So it's these top-down forces that are actually knocking out the trees or bringing in the trees and allowing both to coexist. So one is competition, the other is demographic bottlenecks, bottom up and top down. So which one of it is this? I'm not going to go into detail into these models, but I just want to point out what are these two lines of thought. So the competition-based models are based on this Walter's two-layer hypothesis, right? So it essentially says grasses are the better competitors. So once it rains, the grasses are really good at taking up the water, and they're better than the trees at taking up the water. And the reason that trees are able to persist is because they have deep roots. They have exclusive access to deep water, right? So you have this niche partitioning where the grasses take the water from the top, the trees take the water from the bottom, and that's why both of them are able to persist, right? And it's very simple to mathematically show that if you have this kind of niche, differentiation, then you can actually have stable coexistence between trees and grasses. And so you predict as rainfall goes up, there's more and more water going to be infiltrating to depth, and so tree cover should increase. And then at some point, the trees exclude the grasses, so it becomes a forest, right? So these models say that savannas are equilibrium ecosystems, that they persist, and there's a stable ratio of trees to grasses that you can get for a given set of climatic conditions. On the other hand, the demographic models argue that grasslands and forests are actually the only stable states. This is like a ball on a convex surface analogy, and a savanna is there, and it's either going to become a forest or it's going to become a grassland, but there are forces that prevent it from going either way. So what are called ecological buffering mechanisms. So these could be things like grazers or rainfall variability or fire knocking down trees and browsers eating trees and so on and so forth. So this is an inherently unstable view of savanna ecosystems. So it says that as rainfall goes up, you shouldn't see trees. And then at some point there's enough rainfall, and in the absence of any disturbance, it should switch to a forest, right? And the only reason you see savannas are because you have all these disturbances like fires and herbivory that are preventing trees from establishing or are favoring things here, right? So one says they're equilibrium systems, the other says they're disequilibrium systems. But why is this important? Why do we even care whether this is true or not, right? The reason is because we spend billions of dollars every year on things like fire management, herbivore management, woody management, so on and so forth, right? And so it becomes important to understand whether and how much of those efforts are actually needed, because if it's an equilibrium system, we don't need to clear the trees because it's going to stop at some time. And also when it comes to climate change, everybody is worried about climate change. How are we going to predict how these ecosystems are going to change if we don't know what structures them in the first place, right? And so at least we thought it's really important to understand whether savannas are equilibrium or disequilibrium systems. So are they stable or unstable? And there's empirical support, well, both for and against both of these models. However, most of these studies at that time when we were starting this about 15 years ago were small scale. They were like, so there was support in some cases, there was no support in other cases. And there was a lack of consensus, basically. And, really understanding it required a larger scale synthesis. So we started off saying, let's look at Africa and see if we can actually see what's happening in Africa. And we synthesized data with a whole group of people across diverse savannas from across Africa, right? So we had from 854 savanna sites across Africa, we got data on tree cover, grass biomass, rainfall, soil nutrients, fire, herbivore biomass, and so on. And it covered all the major savanna zones. You had the East African high nutrient savannas, you had the Southern African savannas, including the ones on the Kalahari, and you had the Guinean and the Sudanian, Sahelian savannas, right? So all different savanna types across Africa, we got all this data, we put it together. What does it look like? Here's what we see. If you look at how woody cover changes as a function of rainfall, right? We're seeing that between 150 and 600 millimeters, 650, there's a very sharp upper bound on the maximum tree cover that can be supported at a site. And this is pretty stark, actually. This is a quantile regression, so it's just fitting it to the top 5% of the points, the 95th quantile. And above about 650 millimeters, rainfall appears sufficient to support a closed canopy, right? So it can become a forest somewhere about 650 millimeters of rainfall. Interestingly, I'm not showing you this, but you have to take my word for it. This bound was not explained by anything else, not explained by fire, not explained by herbivory, it was not explained by soil nutrients, phosphorus, clay, nothing, right? So essentially what we're seeing is both of these viewpoints holds true. You have savannas that stable systems on the lower end of the rainfall gradient, and then they switch to disequilibrium systems somewhere about 650 millimeters, right? And so these are what we call climatically determined savannas. So even if you remove all the disturbances like fire and herbivory, these are systems that will remain as savannas and they won't become woodlands or forest, right? And these are disturbance-driven savannas. And now it's really not surprising that as you get more water, you get more tree cover. But it's actually, if you think about it, when you think about a mean field approach, it kind of makes sense. But when you're thinking about it spatially, we're still not sure why we're seeing such a sharp bound, right? Because if trees are competing at these low densities, there's one tree here, there's another tree 30 meters away, there's another tree 25 meters away. Are they actually competing over such large distances? We don't know, but people have looked underground and they've shown that in some cases, tree roots can go about 7 times the canopy width. So we know that the trees are exploiting large areas, but we're still not really sure what actually maintains this bound, right? And, just to highlight the importance of this rainfall or water availability, you can look at places where there's water redistribution. Most of our data come from fairly large sites, so we're not looking at small pockets. But I don't know how many of you have heard of this. This is called the tiger bush in West Africa. And in Niger, this is one of the classic examples of pattern formation and self-organization in natural ecosystems. So you get this, so this is an aerial view, and the dark areas are actually tree-covered areas, and the lighter areas are actually bare ground. And you see this pattern under very specific conditions of a slight slope and a certain kinds of clayey soils. And essentially what happens is if you track this over time, if water is flowing down this way, if that's the slope, the trees around this end kind of die because the water comes and captured here, and the recruitment happens at this end. So this entire pattern just moves across the landscape over time, right? And if you look at it on the ground, it's something like this. It's really stark that you have trees, and then you have just this bare ground, and then you have these trees again, right? And so if you look at this at small scales, we see, these sites are actually able to support a lot of tree cover. But if you look at it at larger scales, we see that even these sites fall entirely within within that upper bound, right? So strongly suggesting that water is what drives this upper limit on tree cover, right? So if you come here, this is the ecosystem uncertain for Africa, at least it seems to be this case. Somewhere about 200 millimeters or less than 200 millimeters is when trees are able to establish. And then you have climatically determined or stable savannas between 200 and 650, and then it switches to disturbance-driven savannas over that, right? So then we asked, okay, do savannas on different continents actually behave the same? Okay, this is what we see for African savannas. What about other savannas? Right. So this is a transition. There's a process enabling tree establishment. And then at some point, the trees establish and the grasses go out. Where do these transitions occur? And do they occur? Whoa. And do they occur in the same areas in different continents, right? And so what we did is we got data on the climate from savannas in Africa, in Australia, and South America. So these plots, don't worry about it. Each point is a savanna location, and it tells you what the mean temperature and rainfall of that site is. And these yellow lines show where 95% of South American savannas lie within that area. Red lines are for Australia, and the blue lines are for Africa. So there's only one take-home point from here that I want you to take home, is that the savannas on different continents appear to be occupying different climate spaces, right? So savannas on different continents occur on different climate spaces. So the same climate where we have savannas in Africa, we do not have savannas, we may not have savannas on other continents. So these transitions seem to be occurring in different climatic spaces in different continents. So why is that? Why is it that like savannas in Africa are behaving so differently from savannas in South America, from savannas in other continents? Before I come to that, we just ask the question, where they occur, do they behave similarly? And so this is a savanna on the top from Africa. That's one from South America, Australia, and India. And as you can see, they look the same, right? You have open, structurally, they're very similar, open grasslands with trees, right? So they are structurally similar. We asked, are they also functionally similar? Do they do the same things, right? And we collated data from about 2,000 sites across Africa, Australia, and America. And I want to point out this, at that time, there's a lack of data from Asia. We'll come to that. This is where we kind of headed, right? Right? And so we analyzed what is it, how do these different factors influence tree cover and tree basal area? Right? So this is what it is for the three continents. So we have something called effective rainfall here. That's also accounting for temperature, right? 100 millimeters when the mean annual temperature is 10 degrees has much different effects from a site where you get 100 millimeters of rainfall where the temperature is 30 degrees. So we account for temperature too, and we have this effective rainfall. And as you can see, this is tree cover or tree basal area as a function of this. And the point is, savannas on different continents occupy different climate spaces. We've seen that already. And the maximum tree cover that can be supported at sites scales differently. In Africa, it seems to saturate. In Australia, it's linearly increasing right till the range where we were able to sample. And South America, again, behaves like Africa. And for a given rainfall, the amount of tree cover that can be supported on these three continents is different. So if you get a certain amount of rainfall, Africa seems to have much more tree cover than Australia, than South America. Why is that? Why is this happening, right? So then we looked at how different factors influence tree cover. So we just used a conceptual model. You don't need to worry about this. So we have a conceptual model where we have rainfall parameters, then we have soil parameters, and then we have temperature. All of this can influence fire, and with all these different interactions, ultimately influence woody cover, right? And so we fit this model, a structural equation model, to all the different sites. Don't worry about it. The only take-home message I want you to, from here, this is Africa, Australia, South America, and the thickness of the arrows tells you how important of a driver each one of these parameters is. And the only take-home message from here, I know this is very complicated, is that, the thickness of the arrows differs in these 3 different continents, right? So essentially what it's saying is soils, moisture, fire, temperature seem to have different effects on tree cover in all these different continents. Why is that again? I'll come to that again in a bit. Resource availability and disturbances have different impacts on tree basal area and biomass in these different continents. So it would seem that, even though they're structurally similar, these savannas are in fact functionally different, right? Why is it? And, why is that? I'll come to it in a bit. And what is the relevance of this? The relevance of this is when we talk about predicting responses to climate change. Right now, most global models think of savannas as a homogeneous entity, right? They're saying all savannas across the globe are identical. And this is what they use in their predictions and their dynamic global vegetation models, which feeds into the IPCC reports and so on and so forth, right? So we said, what's going to happen for a 4-degree warming, which is what's predicted by the end of 2100, I think, to the savannas on different continents. So if we assume a global model, that is all savannas across the globe are identical in the way they behave, then for a 4-degree warming, essentially what it says is this tells you how much tree cover or biomass or carbon is going to go down, right? 0 is no change. Anything negative means it's going to go down. So it's saying for a 4-degree warming, by the end of this century, then, most savannas are going to store less carbon, right? Whereas if you look at, so it suggests a convergent response across all continents. Whereas if we use a regional model parameterized based on the data that we have, essentially what it's saying is the responses are going to be entirely different across the different continents. So for a 4-degree regional warming, there are many areas of Africa that are actually going to store more carbon and become more wooded. Australia and South America, on the other hand, might lose carbon, right? So what it's saying is that a one-size-fits-all approach doesn't work for savannas globally. We have to think about savannas as being different on different continents. We have to parameterize them accordingly for all our climate models and for our regional models going ahead, right? And there's a need for regionally calibrated models. So if we come back to this, I'm trying to figure out why is it that all these savannas in these continents are behaving differently. We started off saying there are important drivers, fire and herbivory, and then rainfall and soil nutrients, right? All of these influence savanna structure. Now, you think about savannas, they evolved about 5 to 8 million years ago. That's what's commonly believed. Because suddenly around that time in the late Miocene, there was this expansion of C4 grasses across the globe. And that's when all the savannas that we see today formed, right? There are a few papers that have come out recently saying it may be more than 8 million years ago. It might actually be a little later than that. But the thing is, when these grasses expanded and the savannas formed, the continents had already separated, right? Gondwana had broken up, all the continents were separate. And savannas on different continents actually evolved independently. And we think that, so we're arguing, we believe that because of their independent evolution, they kind of converged on, somewhat similar solutions, but the solutions were not identical, right? And so that's why we're seeing the differences in these responses is because of the evolutionary history of these trees. So if you look at an acacia, it grows like this. Everybody would have seen the umbrella thorn acacia, the flat top, for the Serengeti and so on. If you look at Australia, the eucalypts, they grow this way. They have different shapes. They have different bark thicknesses. They respond differently to fire, right? And we think it's because of this independent evolution is why we're seeing this different responses on different continents. So phylogenetic and geographic differences have resulted in analogous but not identical solutions on different continents, right? So they're structurally similar, but functionally different. And this has implications for many things. And we believe these differences are potentially due to past differences in evolutionary history. And what this tells us is savannas across the globe are not homogeneous. And the responses to climate change are likely to differ between continents. And climate models need to consider these differences, right? Going ahead. Coming back here, what about Asian savannas? It's really surprising that if you go in the literature at that time, this was This was 2014, about 8 years ago. You'd find absolutely very, very little literature on Indian savannas. So the question was, are there no savannas in India and Asia? And is that the case? Are there savannas in India? It turns out that they are, at least from what, these are photographs. This is from around here, from Western India. If you look at it, it's a grassy system with trees. If we move, this is to NSTR, again, grasslands with trees dominated. Move further south, this is the southern slopes of the Western Ghats, Bandipur Tiger Reserve, Mudumalai Tiger Reserve, grasslands with trees, discontinuous strata of trees. All of these are savanna ecosystems, right? Northwest India, grasslands with trees. Why is it then that there is no data from Indian savannas? And we believe that this is an issue of nomenclature. So if you look at how vegetation in India has been classified, it comes from the colonial foresters who are primarily looking at it from the perspective of forestry operations and timber. So forests was important to them. Anything else was not important because it was not generating revenue, right? So arid to semi-arid savannas, they call these dry thorn forests or scrub forests. Again, they're called forests, not anything else. Dry to moist savannas were clubbed under dry deciduous forests, and grasslands were actually considered as wastelands because they are unproductive lands. And unfortunately, this classification holds true even today, that if you look at the Wasteland Atlas of India, many of these grasslands actually are considered as wastelands, meaning they can be diverted for other uses, right there. So it's an issue of nomenclature. If you look historically, what's happened, all the savannas have been called forests, right? So first thing, before we get to the, so we started asking, okay, so this is a huge problem. How do we go about mapping the Indian savannas? So how do we differentiate true savannas from forests across the Indian continent, right? So, so one approach we thought is to look at the climate spaces on different continents and say, where do we find those areas in India? And if we find those areas, are we likely to find savannas there, right? So we modeled the distribution of Asian savannas using the climate space of Africa. Said, if the world was like Africa, where would we expect to see the savannas? And so this is just, you know, these are modeled outputs where darker areas suggest greater probability of finding a savanna. So essentially here, if the world was like Africa, a lot of the Deccan and the southern parts and the northwest arid parts of India should actually support savanna. But interestingly, if the world was like Australia, then that's where we expect to find the savannas, right? Whereas if the world was like South America, again, we expected to find it in these places and not in the Deccan. So where is it now? We think it's most likely to be this because Africa is the closest analog. We share many of the same species, many of the same genera. Both India and Africa are dominated by herbivores and so on. So right now we're in the process of actually mapping these and trying to find out, map these savannas and exactly where they are. Why is it, again, so if I look at those areas that have been identified by the models, so these are traditional classification schemes, so you can see what they're classified as. Woodlands, forest. So none of them are classified as savannas. They are all classified as forests. What's in the name? Why do we really care whether they call it a forest or a savanna? Does it even matter, right? We argue that it does because when nomenclature is important because it drives management and protection policies in these habitats, right? If you misclassify, we argue that you're going to mismanage these habitats, right? What do I mean by that? So it's the presence of grasses in the understory that actually differentiates savannas from forests. And grasses drive the functional ecology of savannas, whereas the lack of grasses drives the functional ecology of forests, right? Savannas are C4 grasses. They are highly flammable. They evolved to burn. So these are systems that burn. They have frequent fires, and they tend to be open and high light environments. Because of this, all the vegetation that you see in savannas tend to be fire tolerant. They're able to deal with the fire. Everybody, you'll read in the paper like Mudumalai burned, this place burned, forest gutted. But you actually go back the next year, most of the trees are back. All of these trees, well, I'm talking about savanna trees, they have evolved to, they've evolved under a regime of fire. So they are fire tolerant, but they're shade intolerant. They can't grow in the shade. Whereas if you look at forests, it's the exact opposite. The vegetation in forests are fire intolerant. They cannot deal with fires, but they're shade tolerant. They can grow in these low light environments, right? So there's a very fundamental difference between a savanna and a forest in terms of the ecology. And when you misname it, you mismanage it. Why? Because fire is bad in forests, but fire is critical in a savanna. So if you call the habitat a savanna, you manage to prevent fires, because if you call it a forest, rather, you'll stop fires there because fires are bad for forests, right? So that's what's happened across most of India, most of Asia, large parts of the world. When they misclassified it, you've taken systems that are fire adapted and you've actually stopped the fires. Your management is to prevent fires in a system that is meant to burn, right? So you tend to mismanage it, and this comes with a lot of consequences in terms of, I'll just talk about it right now. So what is the status of these savanna ecosystems in India? Right, if you look at the map that we've generated saying this is where they can occur, if you look at a current map, I think this is from 2016, Roy et al., this is a current land use map of India, and you see most of it is cropland, right? Cropland of fallow land. So most of the area that can support savannas in India have already been converted. We've already lost this hundreds of years ago, maybe 400, 500 years ago. So most of the savanna ecosystems in India have already been lost. The problem is what remains, many of them are not protected. So they are home to many of the iconic, fauna. We have the great Indian bustard, we have the nilgai, we have foxes, we have hyenas, we have wolves. All of these are, iconic animals that are highly threatened, highly endangered. They are hanging around in some of the last remaining tracts of savannas, but most of these are not protected. There are very few grasslands and savannas that are actually protected. Other threats, because we call them wastelands, we have developmental activities to convert them to agriculture. Some places may be needed, other areas, it doesn't make sense to sort of convert these to agriculture. Clean energy projects, right? Where are all these clean energy projects happening? They're happening in savannas and grasslands. There are open spaces, so that's where it's happening. And tree planting for carbon sequestration. Everybody is talking about tree planting right now. All governments have committed to, reducing atmospheric carbon and increasing sequestration on the ground. India also has, very ambitious commitments. And globally, what's happening? Everywhere, where do they plant trees? They plant trees where there are no trees before. And so there are the grasslands and savannas. So most of the tree planting initiatives are happening in places where trees have not been historically present. And, they shouldn't be there in the first place. I mean, the point is, we are now in the midst of multiple crises. There's a biodiversity crisis where we're losing species at amazing rates. There's a climate crisis where the climate is changing. And all of these are impacting human well-being. But the thing is, they're all interlinked, right? Biodiversity is linked to climate. Climate is linked to human well-being, all three. And we've been focusing only on the climate part of it, but we're not focusing that much on the biodiversity part of it. So when you plant trees in these habitats, essentially, it's a threat to native biodiversity. It affects the hydrological cycles. It changes hydrological cycles in this place. It may not always lead to carbon sequestration because these are systems that burn. So many of the trees die. And what we don't see when we look at systems like this is actually there's a lot of carbon below ground. There may be no carbon above ground, but there's a lot of carbon below ground. So it's not that these areas are not storing carbon. They're just not storing carbon above ground, right? So all of these areas under huge threats because of this. And like I said, this is a global problem. People have been writing in Science and Nature for the last, 7, 10 years. But every year, you still see some papers saying this is where we need to plant trees. And people are planting trees in these grasslands and savannas, right? And finally, another major threat to these ecosystems are invasive species. Like I said, when you stop fires and stop herbivory, or you change the regimes, and you have invasive species. So these are species that are not native to a particular place, so not native to India, but have been introduced. I don't know if how many of you are aware of prosopis, which is a huge problem right across India. Lantana camara, for example, is another major invasive that's just taken over our landscapes. These are becoming hugely problematic in grasslands because of changes in the management. So if you talk to tribal communities that frequently burned the lands, they would say that we didn't see lantana invasions because of the fire management. And we started seeing lantana invasion following, when they were told not to burn or when management interventions stopped burning those places and so on and so forth. Right. And this is a huge problem that we don't know how to deal with it. I think the globe as such, nobody knows how to deal with it. It's a huge problem globally, but it's something that we need to find ways to contend with. Right. So I just want to synthesize this bit saying savannas are an ancient biome. They support unique biodiversity. They're not wastelands. They've been historically mismanaged and misclassified. They're under threats from many different, drivers, but particularly tree planting initiatives and invasive species are particularly a huge problem currently. And there's a critical need for protection and restoration of Indian savannas and grasslands, right? Do I have time? I still have 10, 15 minutes. Right, so this is the one I wanted to talk about. This is the bit I wanted to talk when it comes to savannas. But I'm just going to spend the last 10 minutes talking about another very, very interesting and amazing ecosystem. It's a mixed tree grass ecosystem. I don't know how many of you have been in the upper Nilgiris and seen the Forest-Grassland Mosaics, right? So these are systems on the high elevations of the Western Ghats where you have trees, where you have forests embedded in grasslands. So unlike in savannas where you have the trees could be all over the place, right? So you have a continuous grass story and you have trees all over. This mixed tree grass ecosystem is very interesting because you have forest patches where there are no grasses, and then you have grasslands where there are grasses, right? And this once again flies in the face of, this whole, I had shown you this figure before. Essentially what this figure says is when you have one climate, you have one biome. So under these conditions, you should see an evergreen forest. Under these conditions, it should be a tundra and so on. But in this case, what we're seeing is under the same climate, right next to each other, we are having entirely different biomes. We have forests where there are no grasses. We have grasslands where there are no trees. And actually, the boundaries between them are fairly abrupt. You're in a forest, you can just take one step out and you're into grassland, right? It's amazing that you have these really stark boundaries between these systems. And it's not just restricted to India, it's found globally. Wherever they're found, they're not very widespread, right? This are photographs of this similar tree grass mosaics from Malawi, Sri Lanka, Bolivia, Madagascar. You find them in Brazil, Angola, Gabon, lots of places all over the globe. But wherever they occur, they're fairly restricted, right? So what is the question? Are they natural or anthropogenic artifacts? How is it that under one climate, for a given rainfall, given temperature, you have these two different biomes? Are they actually, in fact, alternate stable states, or what else? And of course, right, the prevalent thinking was actually these are degraded ecosystems. So they used to be forests. At some point in the past, humans have come and they've mismanaged it. They've cut all these trees, and now we have this mosaic. But is that truly the case? Actually, this is work from Professor Sukumar's group at IISc. And what they did in the Nilgiris is they took these sediment cores, and then you can date the cores. And because trees and grasses have different isotopic signatures, you can tell whether, what's the proportion of grasses to trees in this system. And this they dated 40,000 years before. And essentially all this graph is saying is it's a proportion of grasses to trees, right? And as you can see, it's gone up and down. Sometimes it was more wooded, sometimes it was less wooded. But both trees and grasses have persisted for at least 40,000 years, way before humans were present in this system, right? So forest-grassland mosaics in the Nilgiris have persisted for at least 40,000 years prior to human habitation. And the same thing has been shown from mosaics in other parts of the globe, using both isotopic evidence as well as palynological. That's pollen, right? You can look at pollen in the sediments that are preserved for thousands and thousands of years. So lots of data from Brazil and from other places saying these mosaics are actually ancient and they predate human presence. So saying they're not artifacts, right? So that brings the question, how is it that under the same climate, you have these entirely two different biomes? How do they come about? And what actually maintains them? I don't know how they came about, and we really don't know the answer to that, so I'm just going to skirt that. But we asked, how is it that they are actually maintained at the current time, right? What maintains forest grassland mosaics? And once again, this is a question that people have talked about for a very long time. Ranganathan, who was a forest officer in 1938, so he's written in the journal saying it's actually microclimate, it's frost that actually maintains it. Other people have said, no, it's not. Ranganathan also said it's soil. They said, no, it's soil, that you have entirely different soil. That's why you're seeing forests here, whereas you see grasslands there. Fire, the grasslands burn, forests don't burn. So it's fire that actually maintaining this mosaic. And others have argued the herbivory. Again, the same determinants of savanna structure also for these mosaics, right? But the thing is, and then people have argued about it and made different kinds of statements and conclusions. Here's one. Hence, frost occurrence probably does not provide a satisfactory explanation for the shola grasslands. The assumption that the grasslands are maintained by edaphic factors of soil is good. Somebody else said, well, the fire hypothesis has gained evidence, so on and so forth. But nobody had actually gone out and tested it to see what actually maintains this, these mosaics. So that's what we set out to do. We set out to test what maintains these forest grassland mosaics. This is in the upper Nilgiris, Nilgiri South Division next to Mukurti National Park. And I'm going to talk about some of the work done by one of my students, Atul Joshi. So first thing we had said is, what do these systems really look like? So he went to the India office of the British Library, and he went through all of these old records to try and see what is it that the colonial foresters were writing about the Nilgiris, right? I don't know how many of you have been to Ooty, but this is a drawing from 1857. That's Ooty Lake. That's what Ooty looked like in 1857, right? You can see it's a forest grassland mosaic. Now, the colonial foresters, when they came there, obviously they looked at it and said, clearly it's the indigenous people who have mismanaged this habitat. It should all be forest, and all these grasslands are actually anthropogenically created. And so what they did, they went ahead and started planting trees, right? And they introduced about 40 different species of trees. They started planting here. Many of them did not survive. All of these were exotics like pine and eucalyptus and acacia and so on. But so this is St. Stephen's Cathedral. This is about 1834. Then they started planting all their trees. 1851, this is what it looked like. 1995, you can see it's become fully wooded. 2015, St. Stephen's Cathedral looks like this, right? So the entire landscape, because of the perception that these grasslands are actually the consequence of mismanagement by indigenous people, they went ahead and started planting these trees, and they've converted these grasslands to these wooded areas. And like I said, they planted about 40 trees, but one of them in particular, Acacia mearnsii, has gone rogue, right? So I don't know if you can see this properly. So this is a forest patch, and all of this is Acacia mearnsii or wattle. It's just invaded the grasslands. All of these areas used to be grasslands, but it's now invaded by this one species that has just gone out of control. It's an Australian acacia, right? So it's a huge problem. We're losing these habitats. As it is, they're very restricted, but now they're being threatened by these invasive species and by land use change and so on and so forth. Right, so we asked, we know that these systems appear to be tree grass mosaics, but what actually limits their establishment? Why aren't trees establishing in the grassland? Right, so we can think of it like this. First, the seeds have to get there. Once the seeds get there, they have to germinate. Once they germinate, they have to grow and become saplings, and then they have to establish and become trees. So where in this transition is this bottleneck? What's preventing trees from establishing in this system? So is it soils? People have said it's actually soils and microclimate, which is the local climate. So what is it that we did? We took soils from the grassland, we took soils from the forest, and we put them in these trays, and then we planted seeds in this. We tried to germinate seeds in this. We germinated. And then we placed them in either the forest microclimate or in the grassland. So you had grassland soil in grassland soil in the forest soil in the forest, and forest soil in the grassland, right? And we had two native species and the invasive acacia, all well replicated. What happened to germination? Do seeds germinate? if you look at the grassland and the shola, within the shola, you see no difference between the soil types, right? Both of these are identical. So soil doesn't seem to be influencing germination. There's no effect of soil on the germination of these trees. In fact, we are seeing greater germination in the grassland. So all the trays that were placed in the grassland had actually germinated more, right? So we are seeing greater germination in grasslands, and of course, greater germination for the invasive acacia than for the native species. So clearly it suggests that soil is not the limiting factor, right? Soils is no. Microclimate, actually grasslands seem to be more favorable. So they can germinate there. So why are they not establishing? So then we asked, do soils and microclimate influence seedling establishment? And so we just continued with those plants. We grew them through the season. Again, they were in shola soil or grassland soil, and they were placed either outside or inside the forest. And I'm just going to show you, this is survival of the seedlings over time, right? This is in the grassland, and this is within the forest patch. So if you look within the forest patch, there was a fair amount of survival. Many of the seedlings survived through the course of the winter, over 250 days, right? Whereas and there was no difference between the invasive species and the native species. But whereas if we look at the grasslands, most of the native species had died by the end of the winter, right? By 150 days, they all died, whereas the invasive species actually survived. Suggesting to us that there's something over the winter, drastic overwinter mortality of native, but not the invasive species is happening. And so we strongly suspect that it was frost, right? Greater survival of the acacias again. So is it frost that's killing it? And we measured temperatures across this boundary, and it is amazing. So 5 meters inside the forest, the lowest temperatures you record in winter is about 4 to 5 degrees. And then you just go 5 meters into the grassland, the lowest temperatures recorded are -6 to, about 3 or 4. So across a 10-meter gradient, we are seeing a difference of 7 to 10 degrees in the temperatures, that lowest temperatures between the forest and the grassland, right? And all the frost occurs in the grassland, strongly suggesting that, it's frost that's likely to be killing the native species, right? So soils, again, don't appear to limit establishment, but the native species unable to survive the winter. So we actually did it. So I said, can we manipulate these temperatures? Can we manipulate frost? And if so, will it increase seedling survival? This is an amazing experiment we collected. My students did it, collected from the field, germinated in the greenhouse. We transported back to the field. And essentially what we did, we had these set up in the field where we grew these, and we had these warming treatments. So you have these thermal blankets that we put over these seedlings at night, and it will actually keep the temperature up. In the morning that we take it out, right? So we actually, half the plots were manipulated so that the temperatures wouldn't go below 0, and the other half were left open, right? And so this is the temperature from our manipulated plots and unmanipulated plots. And our warming treatments actually worked. They were always significantly higher than the control treatments. And only 2 days that did we get frost. And one of the days we were unable to get to the field in time because you had to be there, leave the forest before 6 o'clock in the evening. And the other day was really heavy winds, and they just blew off all these things. But otherwise, we had 2 incidents of frost in our experimental treatments and about 17 incidents of frost in the control treatments, right? What do we see? This is a control. Again, same thing what we've seen earlier. Most of the native species die under the control conditions, whereas a fair amount of invasive species survive. Whereas if we look at warming, when under the experimental treatments, from almost 0% survival of the native species went up almost 30%. And if you look at the invasive species, from about 30%, it went almost up to 80%, suggesting that the warmer temperatures actually are favoring the establishment of both. So there's greater survival when you protect them from freezing temperatures. But the overwinter survival of acacias is nearly 90% under the warm conditions, right? So this has huge implications. So these results suggest that low nighttime winter temperatures is what actually limits native trees from establishing in these mosaics and actually maintains these mosaics. Future warming, which we know all the models predict, is likely to favor tree establishment. As it is, the grasslands are under siege, but the grasslands are going to be under greater siege under warmer temperatures. Well, here's the problem. Warming is likely to favor the invasive species much, much more than native species. So even though native species might sort of, have greater survival, the invasive species is going to be much, much more favored. So it's likely to be another huge problem for these grasslands. Not only is land use and past history have impacted them majorly, but the future also doesn't look particularly sort of cheery for them. So there's a very critical need to actually restore these grasslands. These are ancient mosaics. They're highly restricted. Most of it's an endangered habitat. And so we really need to find ways to actually protect this. So sorry, I think I'm running out of time. I apologize if I just went through all of this really fast. But essentially the case that we want to make here, I want to make here, at least speaking for our work, is that, grasslands, savannas, and these forest grassland mosaics are, ancient, unique, and non-anthropogenic biomes that actually need protection. And unfortunately, they don't get the level of consideration or the protection that they need. And hopefully that will change in the future. With that, I think I'd like to stop. So since the future temperatures are likely to exacerbate woody encroachment, lead to further loss of native species, and this can again alter hydrological nutrient cycles and nutrient budgets and impact fire regimes. I haven't spoken about this, but we have data to show that they are doing this. When you have these invasive species and plantations, they are changing hydrological cycles. They're changing how much stream flow is happening. They're also impacting fire regimes. So all of these are likely to change in the future. So restoration of grasslands and savannas is a priority. So with that, I think I will stop. I apologize if I went too fast or over time, but yeah, thank you very much. So, I'm happy to answer any questions or whatever the schedule is. Yeah. A question? Sure. How does that work?
Where you showed that frost could possibly be the thing preventing the trees from growing.
Yeah.
In the grassland area. But I was just wondering whether there was some feedback over there that there's less frost in the areas which show up precisely because there are big trees which cut the wind and so on and so forth. So there is some kind of, unstable feedback.
Yeah, so it's positive feedback. So that's the question. We don't know how they came about in the first place. We know once the forests establish, then they create this microclimate where frost doesn't occur within the forest, right? But how that came about in the first place is not very clear. The only thing that few of the things that we can, is there's one species, a native species of rhododendron that you find there. It's one of the only species that actually establishes in the grassland. It's able to, all the rest are in the Himalayas, and then you have this one species. So maybe it's the one that acts as a nurse or something like that. It establishes, following which, it's able to, and once the tree is established, you have this loop that it becomes warmer, and yeah. So that's the tricky part. We're not really sure how it established in the first place, but that's one of the hypotheses. Something allowed it to establish and then has this feedback loop. Yeah.
Hi, very nice talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So I want to get back to this point you made about controlled and conscious afforestation that governments are doing.
Yeah.
Assuming we are doing the right thing, but you said we're actually disturbing the local habitat, right? You said it's probably going to have ill consequences. At the same time, you also mentioned that this has already happened in Uti. This has already happened in Nilgiris, right? People have planted trees. People have done that.
Yeah.
So do we have this as an example as to what ill effects this causes? Do we know what ill effects this controlled afforestation in Uti has done?
Yeah. So if we talk about tree planting in grasslands, right? So typically if they're doing it for carbon, we know that and so even if you look in the Nilgiris, in these grasslands, actually there's more carbon once you've planted the trees. But it has come at a cost of native biodiversity. There's lots of endemic species that are being lost. It has changed the hydrological cycles. It's changed the amount of nutrients that are flowing out of these systems and so on and so forth. So if you just look at it from a carbon perspective, then you'll say, yeah, the planting of these trees is actually not bad because it takes, we have sequestered more carbon here. So that's a good thing. But on the other hand, it is not always the case. So if there have been studies that have looked at tree planting or increases in tree cover on carbon sequestration in different grasslands across the globe. And we know that in all of these grasslands, all the carbon is typically stored below ground. And some of our own work has shown that most of this carbon is coming from the grasses, not the trees. So it's the grasses that are pumping the carbon in some of these systems into the soil. And there was a paper that published in Nature like a few years ago, which actually looked at ecosystem carbon total. And it showed that in some cases, when you actually plant trees, you tend to lose this carbon that's there in the soil. So the net effect, although you're seeing more carbon above ground, the total amount of carbon stored is actually less because soil carbon is being lost. It doesn't happen all the time. We're not really sure when it happens, but there are instances when planting trees has actually had the negative effect of losing carbon. I don't know if I answered your question. Yeah, but the biodiversity consequences are there. It comes at a loss of native biodiversity. Yeah.
Hi, Mahesh.
Hi.
Nice talk. So I was wondering when you tried to look at which parts in India can be classified as savanna from the Africa model or the Australia model. So parts in Northeast like Kaziranga somehow didn't fall under it. Is it an obviously different biome or?
Yeah, so places like Kaziranga and Manas and all of that, the flooded grasslands. So the dynamics are entirely different. They do have trees but it's mostly tall grasses. But there the problem is flooding because they're seasonally flooded. That's what we can still, but they're much on the wetter end of the gradient. So it's slightly different dynamic just because of the whole flooding business. But actually, it's one of the few systems that are actually classified as grassland and savannas in India, and the traditional classification scheme are these flooded grasslands. Yeah.
Okay.
So,
Thank you. So I have a question.
Yeah.
So regarding the temperature experiments in the mosaic,
Yeah.
how did you came across the experiment in the first place that temperature is going to play a role?
Well, people have made this point in the past, but when we did our germination experiments and then we let the seedlings, we kept them there, all of the native seedlings died at the end of the winter. So it was something that was happening over the winter that was, which is why then we figured the next year we'll do the experiment by actually manipulating the temperature. If it is temperature or frost, if you actually manipulate it and doesn't result in mortality, then it suggests that that is an important driver. So
and one more question is that regarding the savannas, can't there be more than two types of savannas in India, because there can be different kind of climates in India in different parts of like in northern region.
Yeah. Sorry, what two types?
Like you were talking about that African savanna can.
Oh, yeah. It could be something that's entirely
mix of
our own. That is just evolved here. We just used it as a starting point to say where we might see, so that we can actually go there and look at what the vegetation is, because otherwise we have only a few sites, right? We have some 3 or 4 sites that we work in. So where we know exactly what's going on, but if you try to map it across the country, it's a very huge exercise, right? I mean, so we're trying to find areas that we can actually go and look, make a prediction, go there and see whether it fits our prediction. That's all. So you can have 4 or 5 different types. Yeah.
In the Western Ghats, they are made up of volcanic eruptions, if I'm not wrong.
Western Ghats made up of?
Volcanic eruptions. After the volcanic eruptions,
Yeah.
So the soil of the Western Ghats will be different from the African and the Australian region, right?
Right. So there's one thing that I didn't talk about is, so even if you look in Africa and all these places, you have these distinction between what are called eutrophic savannas, so nutrient rich, so the things that you get on volcanic, like basalts, for example, that tend to be new. So like the Serengeti, all of them tend to have high herbivore biomass, right? Because it's fertile, but they tend to be dry. And then you have dystrophic or nutrient poor savannas, which occur on granites and other kinds of poor nutrient poor soils, where fire is the important driver, because the forage quality is not good for herbivores and fires become important. And the same thing that we are seeing here. So if you look in the Deccan Plateau, is when you see all the nutrient rich, that's where all the herbivores are. Whereas if you look at the Western Ghats, actually lots of the places are granitic soils, granitic gneisses and stuff like that, which is not nutrient rich. Because even though whatever they say that there was some volcanic eruption below from the ocean, which is what caused it to go up, I mean, uplift and all that. But many of the sites that we work in is actually relatively nutrient poor compared to the base soils. Yeah, so you do have that nutrient rich, nutrient poor divide.
Hello.
Yeah.
Sir, when you explain, when you tell about the frost land, when
Sorry?
there was grass and only some places there was forest. The last example. So
the tree grass mosaics.
Yeah. Yeah. So in that case, can we claim that just as you explained in your first few slides, that grass took the water from the upper level of the soil and the trees took the water from the deep level of the soil. So can say that mosaics are generally on the slanted.
Yeah.
So there may be some streamlines, some water streamlines, underground streamlines. That's why it occurs.
No, I fully agree. So if you look at those, it looks like in this system, it looks like grasses are on the slopes and the forests are in the valleys, where you're saying there's more water in the valleys. It definitely fits in with that. But some of these areas receive 5,000 millimeters. We recorded 5,000 millimeters of rainfall in a year. So that's way more water than like it's ever need. So there's nothing on the slopes that actually is limiting for the trees. I mean, there's enough and more water there. And interestingly, if you look in many other places in these mosaics, you actually see the opposite. We're not really sure why that happens. In places like New Zealand and even in the Northeast, where you have the forests on the hills and the grasslands in the valleys, right? So you can get the system entirely flipped. I haven't been to those systems, so I don't know what actually drives it. But people have reported in the literature of this flip where you have just the opposite pattern in these mosaics, not like the one we're seeing with the forests in the valleys, but the grasslands in the valleys.
Okay, thank you. Sir, one small question about the evolution theory. As you explained that 20 million years ago, there was all grass. And so my question is why it didn't go step by step, that from grass to some middle level shrubs, herbs, and then goes to tree. Why there is an ecosystem like grass and the long trees?
From an evolutionary perspective,
yeah.
You ask. So if you look at tropical grasses, I don't know if you remember high school biology, C3, C4, right? Tropical grasses follow the C4 photosynthetic pathway. So in that, the first compound is a four carbon compound, whereas the trees are C3. And the C4 is the more recent one. The C3 is the ancestral, and it's evolved multiple times. But somewhere around, so this is like I said, for the longest time, people thought it was 5 to 8 million years ago. There was this expansion of C3 grasses, synchronous expansion of C3 grasses across the globe. It was a time of low CO2 and high aridity. So there was a huge advantage to the C4 grasses, which caused them to just spread simultaneously and form these savannas and tropical grasslands, which people argue is one of the most dramatic, examples of biome reorganization. So over a period, very short time, you had all these new biomes, forming, right? So I don't think the evolution has been from the grass to the shrub so the C3 grasses are which are temperate grasses, and the grasses that you find in the shade are the ancient one, but the C4 is the more recent one. So it's evolved more recently, and it's evolved multiple times. So again, I'm not sure if I got your question correctly, but that's what, although now people are saying it may be older than that, maybe like 20 million years or even earlier. But whatever the point was, by the time these things were spreading, the continents are already separated. So the evolution happened separately on all these continents, which is why we're seeing those differences. Yeah. Thank you.
नहीं
Shared
नहीं
share नहीं किया है।
हाँ, नहीं रुकिए रुकिए, ये ब्लैंक शेड।
ये share कर लेते हैं। ये
दिस वन।
हाँ प्ले कर देता हूँ ये नेक्स्ट इसके बाद प्ले करना
प्ले करती हूँ ना।
ये फर्स्ट लाइन है बराबर इसके बाद यहाँ पे और ये वीडियो है
नहीं नहीं, मुझे वीडियो रखो ना।
वीडियो रखो
हाँ।
इसे क्लिक कर लेते हैं
Thank you, Professor Sankaran, for a great talk. We would now like to recognize all our students who have graduated in the past year. Professor Shubha Tole, Dean Graduate Studies, has kindly prepared a video to that effect that will be played now.
It is my very great pleasure to congratulate students who have received their degrees this year. This year, TIFR awarded 42 PhD degrees, 27 PhD and MSc degrees to integrated PhD students, 1 MPhil degree, and 13 MSc degrees. I will now read out the names of the students from each of these groups. In physics, PhD degree awardees are Upamanyu Moitra, Satyaki Sasmal, Akhil Shiv Kumar, Avijit Das, and Amia Mishra. Surajit Datta, Arnali Das, Devankur Das, Krishna Rani Sahu. Rashmi Ramadugu, Minakshi Gaira, Arindam Pramanik, Apurva Bera. Suvasi Swen, Shovik Manna, Joydeep Chakravarti, Rahul Kumar Gupta. Integrated PhD students, Chandan Dinesh Bagadia, Sripati Venkat Rahul, Santosh Kanappa, Minhajur Rahman, Archit Bhardwaj, Supriya Mandal, Anupam Ray, Rahul Kumar Singh, Dibendu Bala, Rahul Sharma, Lankeshwar De, Advait Jayant Gaikwad, Sumeru Hazra. Awarded an MPhil degree in physics, Vishal Suryanarayan. MSc degrees in physics were awarded to Ayan Biswas, Mihir Kumar Sanjeev Kumar Tripathi, Arpit Kumar Behra. Ranjit Kumar Singh, Pavitra Ray, and Atharv Dekul. PhD degrees in chemistry were awarded to Mona Gupta, Mandar Dattaram Bopardikar, Anirban Das, Shamashri Ghosh, Bhupendra Ramesh Dandikar. Anku Guha, Subrajyoti Dolai, Tathagat Nandi, Saurabh Chaudhary. Integrated PhD, MSc and PhD was awarded to Shumit Awad. In biology, PhD degree awardees, Nikhita Pasnuri, Srimanti Sen, Sauradeep Sarkar, Namrata Shukla, Sucheta Kulkarni, Anamika Sharma, Shilpi Nagpal. integrated PhD students in biology, Shishupal Singh, Payal Chatterjee, Kritika Badrinath, Sahana Sitaraman, Aridni Shah, Avan Kumar Kaushik, Rohini Subramanyam, Astha Kumari, Ashutosh Shukla. MSc degrees in biology were awarded to Rahul Kumar, Sai Shri Suresh Iyer, Asma Sabrin Borbora. PhD degrees in maths were awarded to Prashant Shivaji Arote, Mahabub Alam. Integrated PhD students in maths, Ganesh Kiran Vaidya, Vedansh Arya, Abhishek Chaudhary. MSc degrees in math were awarded to Shivani, Ronit Santosh Kadam, Revati Rajendra Jadhav, Uttaran Chaudhary. Computer and Systems Science PhD degree awardees, Siddharth Bhandari, Sayantan Chakraborty, Prerna Chatterjee, Somnath Chakraborty, and Varun Narayanan. Integrated PhD students in Computer and System Sciences, Gunjan Kumar. In Science Education, PhD degrees were awarded to K. Durga Prasad and Shirish Rajan Khare. I'd like to congratulate all of these students for their achievements.
हो गया
म्यूट हो गए ऑन कर
हो गया ये
नहीं अभी है
And wish them Godspeed and a successful, rewarding career ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Tole. In the next part of the event, we distribute the service medals. These medals honor those who have completed 25 years of continued service in TIFR. I request Director TIFR to come on stage to hand out the medals. I request our Registrar, Colonel Sanjay Gokhale, to announce the recipients of the medals. I request the staff members to come up on the stage when their names are announced and receive their mementos from the Director.
Today we honor all the fortunate members, 38 in total, of TIFR family who have completed 25 years of their service at TIFR. They would be felicitated on this occasion with a specially minted medal, which would be handed over by our director. On behalf of the entire TIFR fraternity, I would like to congratulate and thank all the 38 members who have contributed to the Institute's growth and wish them all the very best to continue to do the same in the coming years. I will also announce the names of all those who have completed 25 years and request them to come up to the stage one by one and accept the 25-year medal and the certificate from the director. I'll call out the names. Mr. Ahire. If he's not there, Mr. Anandaraj. What happened? Oh, beside this. Okay. In place of Mr. Ahire, Mrs. Ahire will be receiving the award. Yeah, Mr. Anandraj, he can come up. Ms. Bhujbal. Mr. S. Chatterjee. If he's not there, then Ms. Dabolkar. Mr. Ganeshan. Mr. S.M. Gudekar. Mr. T.S. Hakib. Professor P.K. Joshi. Mr. J.R. Kamble. Mr. J.N. Karande. Mr. N.M. Khatavkar. Mr. A.P. Kohli. Mr. R.N. Kohli. Mr. A.C. Maikar. Ms. Trupti Mirkar. Mr. R.L. More. Professor Arvind Nair. Mr. P.K. Navrat. तुम्ही देते. नवरत. Mr. P.K. Nawale. He's not there. Professor Oja. Mr. P.K. Pagdhare. Mr. E.M. Paraskar. Mr. S.D. Patil. Mr. H.A. Pawar. Mr. Yogesh Phadke. He's not there. Sister Pimpri. Mr. R. Ravi. Miss Rosario. Mr. M.V. Sahare. Mr. B.A. Sangre. Oh, you'll be safe. Okay. Mr. D.K. Satpute. Miss Shanta Kumari. Mr. A. Shivakumar. Mr. D. Srivastava. Mr. M.S. Thakur. Mr. G.L. Tirodkar. And Mr. Y.V. Upalekar. Congratulations to one and all. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We are fortunate to have such dedicated members in our community. We now break for high tea that has been arranged outside the auditorium in the Shamiana area. Please join us there. We will resume with the rest of our program back here from 5 p.m.
आमचे तरी कधी फोटो काढणार.
Full, sir, full. Full.
बघू सुंदर आलाय एकदम, पण हे खालचं नाही आलं आम्ही. हा मग मला पण काढतोय. मला पण काढतोय. पण आहे
हम सबका फोटो चाहिए, आपका ग्रुप फोटो चाहिए, नहीं जाएगा ना फोटो।
कोण मध्ये सुप्रिया
बाद में लेकिन कल्चरल प्रोग्राम स्टार्ट हो गया ना इमीडिएटली। हाँ तो
अपना फोटोग्राफर जबर तुमको मैं बाद में भेजता हूँ. हाँ ओ उसको बुलाता हूँ ना, उसको दुकान पे एकाला बोलो.
हैदराबाद जाएगी तब मैं
ए साहेबाचा फोटो घे, माझा फोटो घे. वाचताना अनिल फोटो घे. मी घेऊ का माझ्या मोबाईलवर?
बोलिए सब माइक पकड़ने का।
माझा हे घेऊ का फोटो? अच्छा
नेचुरल दिखने का।
ठीक आहे. चष्मा माझी बायको ओळखत नाही, मग ती भडकते. तुला चष्मा काढता येत नाही बोलते ती. हे फोटोग्राफरला बोलव रे, जतीनला. मी फोन मारू का? मग शिंदेला नाही तर कोणाला तरी एकाला बोलव ना. हा कुठे आहे? हमारा गाड़ी लेके गए होगा बच्चे लोग थोड़ा सा.
Start कर लो.
Welcome back. I will request everybody to put their phones in silent mode. Mhm. Okay. Yeah, thank you. I now request the Registrar, Colonel Gokhale, to come on stage and distribute the Founders Day Sports Medals. I request Mr. Manda Sawan, Secretary TIFR Sports Club, to come on stage and read out the names of the recipients. I also request the recipients to come on stage as soon as their names are read out.
Good evening to all. Welcome for Sports Medal Distribution Ceremony on the occasion of Founders Day 2022. Regarding the sports events, this year we have introduced one major event, that is 5K running race for men and women above 18 years. We got a good response and around 75 participants registered their name. This event was introduced, organized and initiated by Shri Bharat Bhushan Joshi, Head Security, and his team with the help of Sports Committee. Our Registrar, Colonel Sanjay Gokhale and General Admin Department supported for necessary permission and approval from authorities such as Navy, local police station to make this event successful. Now let's start the sports medal distribution. So first event is badminton single for men. Winner is Ajintya. Badminton single for men. Winner is Ajintya. Badminton single for men. Runners up Rahul Auchare. Badminton single for men. Runners up Rahul Auchare. I think he is not present. Second event, badminton doubles for men. Winner is Krishna and Nipun. Badminton doubles for men. Winner Krishna and Nipun. Badminton doubles for men. Runners up Nishikant Kadam and D.H. Aradhe. Badminton doubles for men. Runners up Nishikant Kadam and D.H. Aradhe. Badminton single ladies event. Winner is Srinidhi Srinivasan. Srinidhi Srinivasan. Badminton single event for ladies. Runners up Abhidnya Auchare. Abhidnya Auchare. Oh, she is not there. Badminton singles for veterans. Winner is Nishikant Kadam. Badminton single for veterans. Yeah. Nishikant Kadam. Badminton singles for veterans winner. And runner up is D.H. Aradhe. Table tennis single for men. Winner is Srijata Bhattacharya. Table tennis singles for men. Winner Srijata Bhattacharya. Table tennis single for men. Runners up Sachin Pavaskar. Runners up Sachin Pavaskar. Table tennis doubles for men. Winner is Srijata Bhattacharya and Atish Bhattacharya. Table tennis double for men. Srijata Bhattacharya and Atish Bhattacharya. And runners up Sachin Pavaskar and Kishore Kamli. Sachin Pavaskar and Kishore Kamli. Table tennis double for men. Runners up Sachin Pavaskar and Kishore Kamli. Next event is chess. Winner is Atul Jaiswal. Chess winner Atul Jaiswal. Okay, runners up Siddharth Karmarkar. Chess runners up Siddharth Karmarkar. Now I requesting winner of volleyball team, TIFR students, volleyball team, please come on the stage. All Nipun, Dipin, Jagannath Rana, Dinesh, Sanjeev, Amrish, Mani and Miran. Volleyball team, TIFR students, winners. Nipun, Dipin, Jagannath, Dinesh, Sanjeev, Amrish, Mani and Miran. These are the winners of volleyballs this year. And runners up TIFR Mandala Colony, D.H. Aradhe, Vishal Asgolkar, Vineet Bhosle, Prasad, Ajay Valmiki, Sagar Mungse, Shishir Teli and Kiran Shirodkar. Volleyball runners up team. Next event, Carom singles for men. Winner is Rohan Turbekar. Winner is Rohan Turbekar, Carom singles. Carom singles for men. Rohan Turbekar is the winner. And runners up Shashank Parab. Carom single for men. Runners up Shashank Parab. Carom doubles for men. Winner is Raju Kamkar and Vishal Asgolkar. Raju Kamkar and Vishal Asgolkar. And runners up, Harshal Rohekar and Kadir. Harshal Rohekar and Kadir. Okay, he's not there. आहेत आहेत ठीक आहे चला. Next event, cricket six-a-side. I request the winner team, Paletron, Captain Ajay Takke, Mandar Sawant, Rohan Turbekar, Prashant Margaze, Manoj Kumar, Sandeep Pole and Balaji. Paletron, winners Ajay Takke, Mandar Sawant, Rohan Turbekar, Prashant Margaze, Manoj Kumar, Sandeep Pole and Balaji. Cricket six-a-side runners up, Computer Division, Computer Science, Vineet Bosle, Shishir Teli, Rahul Avsare, Shashi Kadam, Sukan Mayekar, Swapnil Malwankar and Prasad Munde. Thank you very much, sir. I am requesting director to please come up on stage. Next event is football. It's a student team. Winners Dev Shankar Saha Roy, Anirban Bala, Nibendu, Tuhin, Saumik Sasmal, Saumik Kandu, Krishnendu, Aritra Gaun and Jagannath. Football team winners. Students team. And runners up team, Computer Center. Football runners up, Computer Center, Shishir Teli, Vineet Bosle, Vishal Asgolkar, Krishnan Kutti, Mohan, Gansham Ramesh, Arun Surya, Sagar Mungse and Siraj Momin. Cricket runners up team. Next event is Kabaddi. I request winners, that is security and transport section. Team names are Rohan Kir, T.L. Jadhav, H.M. Ahir, Santosh Kandu and S.C. Awad. These security teams, they have won continuous 2 matches. They played really well. They work really lot with their duty schedule and busy schedule, shift duties, and they puts a very hard efforts. Kabaddi runners up administration team Tushar Patil, Mangesh Gurav, Sanjog Bandakar, Shashikant Kadam, Krishna Jadhav, Vasudev Chibde, Pradeep Dange, Ankush Terwankar, and Dinesh Lad. Runners up team administration. This year, this quiz competition event was conducted by musical section. And the winner is Charaka, Nilima Kamle, Manoranjan, and Irol Fernandez. Quiz competition winners, Nilima Kamle, Manoranjan, and Irol Fernandez. Quiz competition winners, and runners up Vivek, Mursalin, and Gaurang. Quiz competition runners up Vivek, Mursalin, and Gaurang. Yeah. Okay, they are not there. Okay. This year we have introduced this 500 meters running race for men and women, and the winners is Dipesh Naik. 5,000 meter running race for men and women. Winners is Dipesh Naik. And men's runners up Manush Manju. Runners up Manush Manju. 5,000 meter running race for women. Winners Miss Devanshi Prakash. Devanshi Prakash. $5,000 meters running race for women. Winner Miss Devanshi Prakash. And runners up Miss Sushma Patel. Runners up Sushma Patel. Okay, next is Rangoli competition. Winner is Atharva Sarang. Rangoli competition. Winner Atharva Sarang. First runner up Anup Salgaonkar. First runners up Anup Salgaonkar. And second runner up Praveen Mane. Second runner up Praveen Mane. Last event, Antakshari competition. Winner is Shravya Chavan, Praveen Mane, and Milind Pilankar. Winners Shravya Chavan, Praveen Mane, and Milind Pilankar. First runners up Dr. Archana Vinarkar, Nilima Kamle, and Manoranjan. First runners up Dr. Archana Vinarkar, Nilima Kamle, and Manoranjan. Second runner up Dr. D. Mukherjee, Anup Salgaonkar, and V. A. Arolkar. Second runners up Antakshari competition, D. Mukherjee, Anup Salgaonkar, and V. A. Arolkar. Director sir, thank you very much. Congratulations to all the winners. This year, due to monsoon, sports committee got very limited time to complete all the indoor and outdoor events. But due to spirit and support from various departments, we managed to complete the events as per schedule. I am really very much thankful to all the concerned departments, convener, Founders Day Convener, Founders Day Committee, Professor A. Chattopadhyay, Founder Day Sports Committee of TIFR for their supports to complete all the sports event in sports condition. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Changalur, Colonel Gokhale, and Mr. Sawant. Congratulations to all the recipients. We have come almost to the end of the first part of this program, and I would like to request Professor Akadev Chattopadhyay to deliver the concluding remarks.
So we come to the end of the first part. This is not to say the most interesting part is still left, the cultural program. But before that begins, I would like to thank everybody who made this whole thing possible and successful. First and foremost, I would like to thank the director, Professor Chengaluru, for his support and guidance and personally attending the program. The chief guest, Dr. Anil Kakotkar, for agreeing to inaugurate the exhibition and to be present with us. The Dean Administration, Professor Srirup Rai Chaudhary, for his support and guidance. The Registrar, Colonel Gokhale, for his support and guidance. Professor Mahesh Shankaran from NCBS for delivering an excellent and informative talk. Professor Shubha Tole, Dean Graduate Studies, and her team for preparing the slides for the graduate studies. Dr. B. Satyanarayana and Professor Vijay Raghavan for taking care of the camera and other equipment and making live stream possible, live streaming on YouTube and Zoom. Professor R. Vijay Raghavan and Professor Vaibhav Prabhu Desai for arranging the cultural program which is about to begin and enthrall us. A very special thank to the past convener, Professor Rajdeep Sen Sharma, for his constant source of information and support to me. Mr. R.D. Chogale for inspection and smooth delivery of the 25 years silver medals. Thanks to Mr. Ullas Vaidya for organizing the Science Mela in the morning. Thanks to the catering committee, especially Mr. A.V. Tambe and his team for arranging the food, high tea and snacks. Mr. R.M. Gumaste and his team for floral and other decoration of the foyer area of the auditorium. Ms. Oendrila Rai Chaudhary for curating a fantastic exhibition titled The Story of the Kolar Experiments. Ms. Supriya Potipatti for comparing today's first half of the program. HBCSC and Professor Orno Bhattacharya for arranging science experiment and book exhibition. I would also like to thank Mr. D.V. Shah and his team in the arrangement committee for taking care of all the requirements made by various committees. Mr. Bharat B. Joshi for overall security and transport arrangements and the issue of visitors' passes to all members of staff and participants. Student Cultural Secretary Ms. Charvi Ravichandran and Mr. Atish Bhattacharya for organizing the photography exhibition. Professor Ram Prasad Saptarshi and Mr. Jatin Acharya for serving on the selection committee of the exhibition. TIFR Sports Club, Mr. Mandar Sawant and Mr. Shashikant Kadam and their team for organizing the various sports activities in the morning. The photography section, Mr. Jatin Acharya and Mr. Vijay Shinde for covering all the events. The auditorium staff for arranging throughout the period of rehearsal for all the arrangements that they made and made the program so far a success. The electrical staff and technical services for their support throughout the period of rehearsal and during this program in the auditorium. I would also like to thank Mr. R.V. Raje and his team for cosmetic maintenance. A special thanks to Dr. Sandhya Raghavan and her team at the medical section for taking care of any medical emergencies. I would also like to thank the guest house in charge, TIFR, and HBCSC for providing accommodation to out-of-town participants. And I would also like to extend my thanks to all the members of the Apex committee for their valuable guidance and support in organizing the program successfully. Finally, last but not the least, I would like to thank Mr. Felix and his team in the general administration, especially Mr. Shirke and Mr. Assam, for all kinds of help at all time and constantly keeping me on my toes, helping me navigate through everything. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. I hope you have enjoyed the first part of the program today. I take leave now, as the second part, the cultural program, begins soon and enthralls all of us. Thank you.